The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. With a load of iron.
You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II. Today marks the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. 29 people died as a result. The freighter was the largest the Great Lakes had ever seen. And every year, on November 10th, the Mariners Church on Jefferson in downtown Detroit rings its bells 29 times to commemorate the lives of the sailors who died. Metro producer David Line spoke with Victoria Stewart, Assistant Director of Humanities Center at Wayne State University. She created the pop-up exhibition, The Gales of November Remembered, Detroit and the Edmund Fitzgerald, to commemorate the freighter's 50th anniversary of sinking. It's on display at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum and Mariners Church in downtown Detroit. David started the conversation by asking Victoria what the pop-up exhibition was all about.
For this exhibit, what we're looking at is a kind of deeper look at the Detroit story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The popular ballad Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by the Canadian singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot, of course, mentions briefly that the morning after the disaster in 1975, a reverend at the church rang the bell 29 times for each of the lives lost in the tragedy. But what isn't mentioned, and what a lot of people don't really know, is that the Edmund Fitzgerald has many, many parts of its life in Detroit, both in the fact that it was built here in the shipyards right south of the city itself in Ecorse. It was launched in the Detroit River in River Rouge, and it came through many, many times, including one time in 1974, the year before the disaster, when the anchor came off the boat near Belle Isle. And in 1992, this anchor was brought up and put on shore as a monument. And finally, its last destination before it sunk was Zug Island, right just south of Detroit itself. So there's a lot there, and there are a lot of places in the landscape of Detroit that you can look at and kind of imagine Edmund Fitzgerald being a part of the history of our city.
Mm-hmm. I've certainly walked past the Mariners Church and knew of that connection, but really the Born in Detroit and Last Stop in Detroit being Zug Island, the bookends of this ship's story really is a Detroit connection not a lot of people know about. What sets the Edmund Fitzgerald apart from so many of the wreckages that are in the Great Lakes? I mean, there's hundreds of shipwrecks in the Great Lakes, but the Edmund Fitzgerald really stands out among people's memory. It's memorialized in Gordon Lightfoot's song. My father-in-law sang that song to my wife as a child going to sleep. It reached that level of, I guess, notoriety and kind of folklore. What sets the Edmund Fitzgerald apart from the rest of the ships that have sank in the Great Lakes?
Right. Well, first I got to say that's quite a lullaby that
Yeah.
that was being sung.
No kidding.
What a way to go to bed. I think one of the things, the most obvious thing that sets the Edmund Fitzgerald apart, of course, is the song by Gordon Lightfoot. Certainly, the Great Lakes are a body of water, a group of bodies of water that are connected, that hosts a lot of shipwrecks. You know, there are a lot of wrecks throughout the whole chain of lakes. And so it's not actually that uncommon that boats sunk and people lost their lives. But I think the biggest thing that allows this story to resonate kind of across the United States and Canada especially, is the fact that a ballad commemorated it. Other things that I think contribute to the survival of this story and its importance are the fact that it was a very, very famous ship for being the largest of its day. For the first year of its working life, it was the Queen of the Great Lakes, which is a title given to these notable large feats of engineering that go through and push the limits for what you can do with the Great Lakes freighters, right? And so the fact that it was such an important kind of popular boat, that it was a boat that had a great reputation both among the people who worked the Great Lakes as well as the people who liked to watch the boats from the shores. And of course, the fact that a ballad that went number 2 on the Billboard lists happened to freeze it into people's memories and to help keep the story going long after people would normally have even thought about it.
Can you tell me more about the Edmund Fitzgerald's reputation as a ship before it sank? What did people think and feel about this ship?
Right. Well, I'll say that there are people who definitely know the specifics better than I do because I'm not, there's a whole category of people who and kind of folklorically refer themselves as boat nerds who know a lot of this history better than I do. But the essential fact is that the Edmund Fitzgerald was a ship that broke the record for its size when it was first built. It was built very specifically to meet the largest size possible to fit through, for instance, the Soo locks up at Sault Ste. Marie and, Upper Peninsula in Ontario. It also continued to break records for cargo weights throughout its career, and a lot of times it would break its own records. So it was this ship that was known for pushing the boundaries for what was possible with Great Lakes shipping and the amounts of raw materials that could be sent throughout the lakes chain. So that was one thing that was important to its reputation. People knew that the ship was a reliable workhorse, that it would get the job done, and that it would exceed expectations sometimes in what could be done. One of the other important aspects of the ship is that it had, one of the things that was interesting was that a previous captain, not the one who, McSorley, who passed away on its last voyage, but a previous captain named Pulsar, he was known for playing Christmas carols on the loudspeakers of the ship as they would go through narrow passages. And he also was known for using a bullhorn. And when there were people assembled along the banks of, especially the St. Mary's River up by Sault Ste. Marie, he would give running commentary of what was going on with the boat and notable things that people might be interested in. So it became this ship that, more than many of the other Great Lakes freighters that also were a part of this whole world, it's pretty common to see these boats going up and down the rivers and the lakes of our system. This one had a particular reputation for not only being admirable in its workload and in its work level that it was doing in the industry, but also interesting for people who might not even know very much at all about Great Lakes freighters, but could go stand on the banks of the shore and, hear a Christmas tune or hear what was going on in the ship. So it became something that was among many notable ships, and again, among many large boats throughout the system, one that people particularly turned their heads toward when it was coming.
Mm-hmm. And when, on November 10th, 1975, when the ship did sink, when people found out, what was it like in Detroit in 1975 when this ship sank? How did people react?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, right? Because this is a boat that was supposed to come here. It was supposed to do its thing and then go back to doing its next job or to finishing up for the season. And so when it didn't happen, when it was noticed first among the captains up in the Great Lakes, up in Lake Superior nearby, that something terrible had happened, it kind of created this ripple effect. In 1975, you start to have media attention the day after was pointing out that, gosh, this boat disappeared in Lake Superior. And so I think for people outside of the Midwest, of course, it's shocking to think that a lake in the Midwest could even swallow a 700-foot boat. But for people in Detroit, you had people who were feeling the effects immediately because it was something that would affect them personally. Of course, the Mariners Church has been around since 1842, serving the seafaring community of Detroit, and so it was only fitting, of course, that the bells would be rung in that particular instance. But one interesting story that I noticed when I was researching this exhibit is that the J.W. Westcott Company, which of course is the only floating zip code in the United States, it's the boat that serves the ships that come through the Detroit River and, for instance, providing them courier and mailing services and so forth. The morning after the disaster, the workers, they had a pile of mail and laundry that was supposed to be delivered to the Fitzgerald, that day or the day after. And so it was noticed immediately that something that normally would happen, a routine had been broken, and it was broken for one of the worst reasons imaginable.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, some of the people who know first are those who are carrying out those daily activities, the connection from the boat to the mainland.
Exactly, and the other boats that would have interacted with the Fitzgerald during the trips. So,
And I mean, it's striking that in 1975, it's so much more recent. I know 50 years is a long time, but like you said, there have been ships sailing and sinking on the Great Lakes for much longer than 50 years. And 1975 feels like such a modern time. I mean, there was so much more telecommunication ability, and news can travel so much faster then. And I wonder if that had something to do with the Gordon Lightfoot song kind of taking off, where 100 years ago, it would be a lot harder for that kind of a thing to happen.
Absolutely. I think there's two things that I have found interesting in this, and it's something I want to look more into as I could look into the Edmund Fitzgerald forever. It's such an interesting story. But one of the things that I've been noticing is, of course, the role of the news media. Gordon Lightfoot heard about this because he read an article in Newsweek that inspired him to write this story. A lot of people saw this on their television, famous anchors from the past, including Walter Cronkite and Tom Tom Brokaw from NBC covered this. And so this is a time when people are watching the news daily. It's not a big thing to us. I mean, we get news on our cell phones every few minutes, but this is an era where it was very normal for people to watch their daily news either at 6 p.m. or 10 or 11 p.m. And so they're getting information that way. And the other part is that we have this popular music platform known as the radio, which have these mechanisms known as the Billboard charts that measure popularity and measure kind of the breadth of a song entering into the kind of common arena of understanding. And so both of these media factors played a huge role in the way that we remember the Edmund Fitzgerald today, and the fact that it's remembered at all beyond the survivors and the shipping community itself.
Yeah, the sentimentality kind of gets amplified and moves so much faster. Yeah. I'd like to go back to the pop-up exhibition that you've put together. It's going to be at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum and also the Mariners Church downtown on Jefferson. Can you kind of give me paint me a picture of some of the things that are actually in it? Like, what will people see or read or experience with this exhibition?
Right. So this is a panel. It's just 6 panels that are, the roll-up retractable banners. And so it is a reading and visual exhibit. It'll have both photographs and maps and just details that explain the story from a Detroit perspective. And so it's something that I have designed to be complementary to the really, really great works that you see both at the Dawson and the Mariners Church. These two organizations have been telling this story faithfully for years now, decades. And so we at the Humanities Center just wanted to contribute our little bit to that. I should say I am a folklorist, and so in my training, I like to look at the small things that people notice and think about with the story that don't always get large attention. And so coming to Detroit, I've lived here now for over a year, and I actually moved here from the Western Upper Peninsula where, the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald is practically the national anthem at this time of year. I just started realizing how much of a Detroit story it was, apart from the parts that people notice. And especially traveling through the landscape along the Detroit River, you see these places that the ship interacted with during its life. And it just makes you think how important Detroit is to the greater shipping industry and to the history of the Great Lakes in general. So this is what I want to convey, is that this small thing that happened, this tragedy that happened that resulted in the deaths of 29 people and a lot of heartbreak for their friends and family and co-travelers along the system, has these important effects right here in Detroit. So I like to look at both the history, like what was it that it was like when the ship first launched, the fact that it was a part of this broader shipbuilding industry that we had in Detroit for so long and that existed along both the Detroit River and the St. Clair River. I like to show that even though this boat was registered in Milwaukee and people primarily can think about it in terms of being a Milwaukee-based boat and being a boat that died in the Upper Peninsula, or between the Upper Peninsula and Ontario, it actually has Detroit origins, and so it's very much a boater city situation, if you will. And then I explore how the story went from being a tragedy, from an occurrence, to a legend. Things happen, and sometimes people don't remember them, but in this case we really did remember them. And there's the way that it's remembered more broadly outside of Detroit, and also the way that Detroiters are able to remember it through our local commemorative activities, through the landscapes that document the life of the boat and the times of the boat. And that's what I really want to come through to people, is that the Fitz is very much a Detroit story, and that there are places in Detroit where you can still visit and reflect upon this story today.
When we tell stories over time, they can change. And I'm curious, in your research, as you've been hearing this story for many years, and now you've been kind of putting together this version for the pop-up exhibition. How has the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald changed over the years, and what is that moment where it turns into a legend from a news story? How do you kind of demarcate reaching that next level status?
Right. So I think a story moves from being a tragedy and a news item into being a legend that's still a tragedy at the time when people start to incorporate it into their personal feelings about the situation. So, there's a difference between reporting something has happened, a ship broke up in the Great Lakes and sank last night versus, for instance, my family member served in that ship before that happened, or I've seen the Fitzgerald or similar boats go up and down the lake system many times. When people personalize the situation and move it beyond just reporting of facts to something that they can experience in an emotional way that relates to them, that's when it becomes a part of legend as opposed to just something that's told and something that's told factually.
Now, the cause of the ship sinking has been a matter of debate. You mentioned boat nerds and people who just cannot get enough history, and there's plenty of information and accounts and opinions on what was the thing that finally broke it up and had it sink. But how many different interpretations of those last moments of the ship have you come across?
Yeah, I would say that there are a couple of leading theories. This is a long ship. It's 729 feet long, 729 feet long. It was filled with iron ore pellets. This pellet called taconite are these very small, it kind of looks like dog kibble when you look at it. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, it absorbs water. It's not like iron that you look at that's been processed and that is a solid ball of metal. It's something that needs to be processed and further boiled down to be the solid metal that it is. And so this is something that could contribute to the dangers going on with the boat. A lot of people who have written about this, and a lot of people, I'm not an engineer, I'm not like a marine law person by any means, but a lot of the different factors that people point out when they talk about what led to this includes things like structural stability of a 700-foot long boat over time. It had served for 17 years and had seen some stuff in that time, but also the cargo itself being something that can roll and slosh along in the waves, and if it gets bulked down with water, can have negative effects on it rolling back and forth throughout the ship, particularly when you're dealing with waves on the lake that are about 30 feet long or 30 feet high. All of these factors contribute to many plausible scenarios that can happen that caused the boat to hit the bottom, to break into its multiple parts. The middle section was pretty much completely obliterated, and to have one part of it wind up upside down on the lake bottom, 530 feet below the surface. So a lot of people do, and these are folks who have a lot more information and knowledge regarding things like physics and engineering than I would by any means, but there are a lot of variables that people can look at very very clearly to get a reasonable picture of why the boat is down there now and how it is that it wound up that way in the first place. And, people can look at a lot of books and a lot of even government reports and so forth that share this information.
People can go to the Dawson Great Lakes Museum. They can go to the Mariners Church. They always do commemorate the Edmund Fitzgerald. It's been 50 years. You've got a pop-up exhibition now to kind of add on to that storytelling and commemoration. What feeling do you want people to come away with who go, and whether it's the first time or the 50th time that they're remembering the Edmund Fitzgerald sinking, what do you want them to come away with?
Well, I want people to come away, and I would say the Dawson folks and the folks at the Mariners Church too. It's good for people to come away with the fact that this was a hometown boat. Like this was our ship in a lot of ways, and that the people who were lost on it, they weren't really Detroiters. I don't think, if I remember correctly, none of them were from Detroit. But the Great Lakes shipping community stretches all across the lakes. It stretches all the way out to the St. Lawrence Seaway, quite frankly. And these are all people who had lives, they had dreams, they had ambitions, and they had families that they left behind. Just like the people who built the ships here in Detroit, just like the people who stood on the waterfronts and waved at the ships as they go by. This story is, these tragedies that happen are things that people can experience in an emotional way and relate to on a human level. And so exhibits, songs, church commemorations, book talks, all the things that are going on this weekend are ways for people to get together and have an emotional connection to a story that has a Detroit start, was supposed to have a Detroit end, and that we keep in the hearts of Detroiters through these things every year. The 50th year is a big one, but this happens every year, and it's because of folks like those at the Dawson, like those at the Mariners Church, and like all the folks who attend those events keep the story alive and the memory of the people who lost their lives that night in our heart.
Victoria Stewart is Assistant Director of the Humanities Center at Wayne State University. She created a pop-up exhibition, The Gales of November Remembered, Detroit and the Edmund Fitzgerald. It was on display at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum and Mariners Church in downtown Detroit this weekend, and today, the Edmund Fitzgerald sank 50 years ago.
When the waves turn the minutes to hours, the searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they'd put 15 more miles behind her. They might have split up or they might have capsized. They may have broke deep and took water. And all that remains is the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters.
That's going to do it for us today on the Metro. The show is hosted by Robin Vincent Tiagram and myself, Kerry Jr. II. It is also produced with Sam Corey, Jack Philbrand, and Nadia Zied. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music is by Sam Bobian, and our senior producer is David Lyons. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.
Takes in what Lake Erie can send her. The iron boats go as the mariners all know, with the gales of November, remember.